In our last video, we took a look at Clone Wars veterans who served within the Rebel Alliance. These individuals brought with them a huge amount of experience and knowledge to the rebellion in almost every field, ranging from logistics to battlefield tactics. The Empire also had a huge amount of Clone Wars veterans amongst their ranks because when the Republic fell, the Grand Army of the Republic died in name only. So today, we're going to be taking a look at some of these Clone Wars veterans that served the Empire. At first, the Republic fleet got a new coat of gray paint. Then clone troopers were given new suits of armor. Gradually, more and more equipment was being replaced, but perhaps the most tragic part of the transition from Republic to Empire was the devastation of the clones' homeworld of Kamino. Sure, the Kamino and Dolph and Ken weren't the kindest individuals to their clones, but the destruction of the cloning facilities on Kamino and Tipica City basically started a countdown for every clone trooper that was still alive. It was a constant reminder that from here on out, their numbers would continue to dwindle and not be replenished until one day they finally would all go extinct. The activation of the clones' inhibitor chips did dull their sense of disappointment to a certain degree, but I'm sure most of them felt the impending doom that surrounded them as one by one the clones would retire from service. And what other choice did they have but to continue to serve? The few clones we mentioned in our last video, like Rex, Gregor, Wullf, who managed to fight their way towards freedom, were the exception to the rule. For most clones, the nightmare of war and combat would continue on. Because of their rapid aging, most clones became unfit for duty by the time they were 15 to 20 years old, or the human equivalent of 30 to 40 years old. But some clones managed to fight well past their expiration date. In 14 BBY, when Darth Sidious and Darth Vader arrive in the Wilhuff system to inspect the local Imperial garrison, Cham Syndulla sets a trap and basically destroys their Star Destroyer. The two Sith are forced to go to ground and they spend days avoiding Twi'lek resistance patrols and giant swarms of lilacs. Lilacs are basically like the arachnids from Starship Troopers, but much more terrifying. Accompanying the Sith were two royal guardsmen who survived the initial crash onto the planet. One of them was a captain and a clone. If he was amongst the first wave of clones born in 32 BBY, he would be around 18 years old during this mission, or 36 in human years. The clone captain actually manages to survive for quite a long time alongside the Sith, but he ultimately would die inside of a lilac nest. Still, it's quite impressive that he survived as long as he did. Both Sidious and Vader were also pushed to their limit during this operation. 14 years later, another clone trooper named Crag would be assigned to Foot Patrol 7 on Tatooine. He and his fellow stormtroopers would inspect a suspicious land speeder while looking for a fugitive rebel droid. If Crag had been amongst the first wave of clone troopers, he would be around 32 years old, or 64 in regular human years. Now, old clone stormtroopers never really got along with their non-clone counterparts. They saw these new Imperials as much less disciplined and skilled than the clones they were used to serving with, and that kind of makes sense. The clones were trained for 9 years straight before being deployed. These new stormtroopers at best had only 1 or 2 years of training. Prasad Dibs was a master within the Jedi Order. As a Miraluka, his species was born without eyes, but were extremely proficient at using Force sight to maneuver around environments. Prasad Dibs was one of the few Jedi to oppose the Clone Wars from the beginning. He saw this conflict as a perversion of the Jedi Code. During a mission to the planet of Hisrich, Dibs ends up having a disagreement with Master Mace Windu and challenges him to a duel. Dibs, of course, would be defeated, and then he would be assigned to library duty for the rest of the war as punishment. When Order 66 came around, Dibs would become a member of the feared Inquisitorius. Even though he was one of the highest-ranking Jedi to join the Inquisitorius, he would actually be assigned to the rank of 10th Brother. The Grand Inquisitor position would be given to a former Jedi Temple Guardian. Ironically, Prasad Dibs would perish when his own Purge troopers were tricked into carrying out Order 66 against him by a rogue Jedi during the invasion of Mon Cala. If you knew the full story of Kendal Ozzel, you'd be surprised that this buffoon of an officer stayed alive as long as he did and made it to such a higher rank within the Imperial Military. Born to a wealthy military family on the world of Corrida, Ozzel had an excellent education and far too many chances to succeed. During the Clone Wars, his leadership style could only be described as the type of officer who would usually get fragged by his own troops. Fortunately for him, the clone troopers were a bit too disciplined and obedient to do that. Kendal Ozzel had personal connections with Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, who would commission him as a captain within the 44th Special Operations Division. As a military leader, Ozzel would relentlessly pursue fame and glory by carelessly throwing his troops into the meat grinder. Kendal Ozzel found himself surrounded by competent clone troopers and Jedi commanders who only cared about the success of their missions and not the prestige of being a decorated officer. Kendal Ozzel was therefore more than happy to take responsibility and credit for the clones and Jedi's brave actions and victories. This is basically why Kendal Ozzel was able to rise so quickly through the Republic military hierarchy, and then later when he joins the Empire, he would basically do the same thing. Any kind of mistake he made, he would push on to his subordinates, and any kind of success that his subordinates made, he would take credit himself. The destruction of the Death Star and Darth Vader being Darth Vader would kill many of the more experienced and competent officers ahead of Kendal Ozzel. This finally propels the buffoon to the rank of Admiral, at which point he served beneath Vader directly. Vader immediately knew what kind of officer Ozzel was, and he enjoyed feeding off of the cowardly man's fear. During the Battle of Hoth, Admiral Ozzel exposed the Imperial fleet's position prematurely by jumping too close to the planet. Darth Vader would finally retire him as a result. Wullf Yularen was an officer within the Republic diplomatic fleet, which was basically the closest thing the Republic had to a navy before the Clone Wars. Because so few individuals had military experience in the Republic, Chancellor Palpatine encouraged Yularen to sign up with the Grand Army of the Republic. Yularen would be commissioned as an Admiral, and he'd become one of the youngest admirals in galactic history. Yularen would prove to be a very capable officer during the war and would be involved in several major engagements, starting with the Battle of Christophsis. Admiral Yularen was the type of officer who was always prepared for battle. He spent countless hours preparing dossiers on his enemies so that he could better understand the battlefield tactics. He was also a very well-disciplined officer, and even though he had disagreements with brash commanders like General Skywalker, Yularen always followed the sacred chain of command, which allowed him to work well with almost anyone. Yularen would continue to serve in the Navy when the Republic transitions to the Empire. A few years later, though, he would retire. Yularen would find a second career in the Imperial Security Bureau. He would be commissioned as a colonel, and his first assignment would be to expose seditious behavior within the Imperial Senate. He would rise to become one of the Emperor's most trusted ISB agents, and he would be responsible for personally rooting out all sorts of corruption and traitorous behavior amongst the Imperial ranks. People oftentimes forget that Wilhuff Tarkin started out small. He actually first joined the Planetary Defense Force of his home system of Iradu. Eventually, he, like many of the other officers on this list, would be personally groomed by Chancellor Palpatine for a position within the Republic Navy. As a captain during the Clone Wars, Tarkin would participate in the Battle of Kamino. He would later be captured during the Battle of Mercana in 20 BBY. The captain would be sent to the dreaded Citadel prison. He would wait there until he was rescued by a joint clone Jedi task force under the command of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. Shortly after returning to the Republic, Tarkin would be assigned to the Strategic Advisory Cell's Special Weapons Group. This was an organization that would oversee several different projects, including the development of the Death Star. Tarkin would meet Lieutenant Commander Orson Krennic, who was in charge of the Death Star program during this time period. By the end of the Clone Wars, Tarkin had risen to the rank of Admiral. Palpatine would restructure the galactic government and personally appoint governors to each sector of the galaxy. Tarkin would be given one of these positions. From then on, Tarkin would become Emperor Palpatine's personal problem solver. In those early days, that included the oversight of the decommissioning of Kamino and the creation of the new Stormtrooper Corps. They also included the occupation of Mon Cala and, of course, continued oversight of the Death Star program. Anakin Skywalker's achievements during the Clone Wars need no introductions. Simply put, he was one of the most effective commanders in the entire Jedi Order and was responsible for countless victories over the Separatists. He also single-handedly took out Count Dooku during the Battle of Coruscant. But what we fail to realize is that most people in the Star Wars galaxy had no idea that Anakin Skywalker would become Darth Vader. Most individuals believe that the heroic Jedi Knight perished at the end of the Clone Wars along with all of the other Jedi. In fact, it wouldn't be until much later on during the New Republic era that people found out who exactly Darth Vader was. But to those who fought with Anakin during the Clone Wars and Darth Vader during the Galactic Civil War, it was clear that these two were the same individual. Sure, Darth Vader was a lot more brutal than Anakin and perhaps cared less for the men beneath his charge, but that same tenacity and aggressive desire to push against the enemy was still there and stronger than ever. The Chiss known as Mithra Naruto would become one of the greatest commanders in all of galactic history. But most people don't realize that he actually made contact with the rest of the galaxy, or what the Chiss call lesser space, many years before the Galactic Empire even rose to power. And more importantly, he ends up meeting a young Jedi Knight known as Anakin Skywalker on a planet known as Mokiv in the far outer rim. The Separatists have been building a droid factory on the planet and were creating B-2 super battle droids armed with cortosis. Cortosis was a material that was not only lightsaber resistant, it could also short out lightsabers on contact, which of course presented a huge threat to the Jedi. Thrawn decides to aid Anakin Skywalker in his mission to destroy these facilities, but he also had his own plan here. You see, he wanted to learn more about the Separatist Alliance and also the Republic. He also wanted a better understanding of the Clone Wars conflict and how it would affect his own people. Typical Thrawn type of behavior, always curious about what was going on around him. Years later, Thrawn would join the Empire. He would mention to Palpatine that he had actually met Anakin Skywalker many years ago, and upon hearing that Anakin Skywalker was supposedly dead now, Thrawn offers to take his place as a weapon for the Empire. Pal Belo was Old Navy, and he was a very staunch Republic loyalist. When the Clone Wars started, he was already old enough to retire. He was actually running the Defiance Flight Training Institute, which was this large ship that was designed to train the next generation of bridge officers for the Republic. When the Empire took over and destroyed the Republic, Pal Belo was furious. His school would be absorbed into the Empire, and when Darth Sidious and Darth Vader came to inspect the ship, Commandant Belo attempts to jump the school into a nearby star, which should kill everyone on board. Unfortunately, Darth Vader figures out Belo's plans and stops this from happening. If you really think about it, the Galactic Empire was full of a bunch of novices. This was because the Clone Wars was fought mainly by clones, Jedi, and droids. And prior to that, you had the Ruusan Reformation, which was basically 1,000 years of continuous peace. So having veterans like the individuals in this list supplement your ranks really did help smooth out things for the Empire, especially in those earlier years. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,